Our first speaker this afternoon is Carolyn King, also known as Kim King, from the University of Waikato. It's absolutely a delight to be introducing Kim this afternoon. So anyone that works on pest animals in New Zealand, and I'm one of them, has known Kim and sometimes worked with Kim for a very long time. She's hugely respected in this field in New Zealand, and it's a delight to introduce her. And she's going to speak about proposals with a long history, which ones worked and why. Thanks.
Where's the doofer? All right, yeah. Good afternoon. It's a great privilege to be here, particularly as in October of this year, I will be celebrating 45 years since I was recruited by DSIR to become New Zealand's one and only stoat specialist. We still have stoats, and so therefore I'm the living proof of the fact that if targeted investment doesn't always work to give you the outcome you want. Which is forward. Yeah. It also gives me a long view of history, and I think that it's worth taking a quick view over some programs that worked and some didn't. A lot of them were labelled as crazy in their time, both here and overseas, and some of them worked and some didn't, and some never could have done. So it's worth having a quick look at those, because if we can summarise the differences that characterise the ones that did and those that didn't, it will help us in due course to plan predator-free New Zealand. We can't just keep on doing more of the same. It's not a matter of finding more and better ways to kill things. The first one that didn't work is one of the oldest, of course, which was an old idea that to get rid of a pest, you just bring its natural enemies. There was a huge number of stoats and ferrets and weasels brought to New Zealand in the 19th century, but they couldn't, in fact, even prevent rabbits from responding to good conditions. These two graphs represent the number of rabbits on a station in the Waikati Valley, and the stoats were already there at the time of this remarkable, increase in rabbits in responding to good conditions, and they couldn't prevent the ongoing loss in the wool. And so they were there, but they couldn't do anything to help. Here's another one that didn't work either. Myxomatosis killed more than 99% of the rabbits, at least the first and lethal versions of the myxomatosis in Australia and in Britain, not in New Zealand. And you would think that if you had a device that could kill 99% of your population, you'd be well on the way to eradication. But that is to forget that, in fact, you can't predict invisible processes from a visible event like the death of a particular animal, and therefore you forget that nature is actually on their side. You can't actually get past the fact that the individuals that escape whatever it is you throw at them will be the parents of all the oncoming generations. And therefore, attenuation of the virus and the evolution of resistance was inevitable in that case and in many other cases. Here's another one that didn't work, the spread of American mink in UK. There was a trapping effort, a national one, coordinated by the Department of Agriculture, but the mink avoided the traps on land. By then, leg-hold traps were illegal then. They couldn't prevent the spread or reduce the numbers, they just simply abandoned the campaign. Now, in fact, new technology is making use of the fact that floating rafts on still, quiet rivers are irresistible to mink in the water. And so now they are helping to reduce the numbers, although, of course, it's much too late for eradication. Here's an example of an eradication program that really could have worked. The Himalayan tahr were reduced by aerial hunting to about 5,000 by the middle 1980s, and there were calls to have that operation completely go on to its logical conclusions, remove them. But in fact, there was too much objection from recreational hunters. They managed to get a ban on aerial hunting and negotiate a compromise plan, which still continues, There is now an ongoing monitoring program of the tower and of the alpine vegetation. It's an ongoing cost. That was an eradication program that might have worked, and we missed the chance. Here's one that could never work, just keeping stoats off nearshore islands. This is a picture of the channel between Maud Island and the Marlborough Sounds, and it's only 900 metres from the mainland. A stoat can swim that in an hour or less. And Maud has been invaded many times, and then there was a new invasion on Kapiti and a re-invasion on Rangitoto, and then there's the fact that you simply can't get stoats off Secretary Island at all. The colour-coded symbols on this map are the family relationships which were worked out by Andrew Veal from genetic data to show there was and is a nearly ineradicable hard core of untrappable females which continue to produce offspring year after year. And as well as that narrow Acheron passage can't actually prevent occasional re-invasions. So it's no good trying to hope to keep stoats off islands nearer than, well, we thought a couple of kilometres. It's now more likely to be about 5. Now, the thing is, many of these examples that you can look at in the past didn't work to start with, but they didn't give up. So here's one. This is the last koipu in Britain. After a failed trapping program, they started again. They had the additional help of the fact that koipu are tropical rodents with bare feet, so they're very vulnerable to cold winters. So the new program that started with much greater effort, the 24 trappers, enormous numbers of animals killed. But of course, always there is the possibility that they might want to keep a few so that not to put themselves out of a job. The people who organised this got round that by offering the trappers 3 years' salary if they got the last one. So none of those animals escaped because the idea of getting 3 years' salary for doing nothing very much was quite irresistible. And so the success, aided by several cold winters, was achieved in 1989. Here's another one that worked eventually after failing to start with. Marion Island is a reserve in the South Indian Ocean administered by the South African wildlife authorities, and they discovered that the cats on the island there, these little guys here, were vulnerable to cat flu. So they brought the cat flus in, which reduced the population by quite a lot, but within 5 years, of course, they began to develop antibodies. And so eventually they had to turn to a different idea, a different strategy. They had to shoot and trap the last few cats. Eventually they did achieve that goal, but it wasn't just with the help of cat flu. Here's yet another one. Macquarie Island had both cats and rabbits, and they reduced the numbers very low eventually, but not entirely. Then they got rid of the cats, and the rabbits recovered to some extent. And so they had to bring in a new policy, just say, never say die. Well, if it didn't work, myxomatosis, then we'll do something else. So they brought in calicivirus and poison baiting and hunters and rabbit dogs. And they threw everything at the rabbits, and they got them away by 2012. The point about it was they didn't give up. When it didn't work, they changed strategies. Now, there are a few cases where you can say it worked immediately. There was a meeting in Wellington here in 1976. I was present there when everybody who was anybody in rodent eradication at the time, John Innes was there too. He was just finishing his master's, I remember. We all agreed that it's impossible to get rats off an island bigger than 1 hectare. At that time, it was true. Then, just around the corner, the invention of a birdificum and carefully targeted bait placement, it managed to get rats off Breaksea Island. The idea was labelled by the head of Deeside Ecology Division, the people who did it, colleagues of mine at the time. He labelled them crazy. They said it's impossible. But by using this new technology and in the right way, they were able to show that it could be done, and it was done in 3 weeks, just like that. Here's another one that was very loudly labelled crazy and impossible, the idea of getting Norway rats off Campbell Island. I was at the conference where they said they were going to do this, and the general assumption was it'll never work. But in fact, with the technology and with the right attitude and with a bit of good luck with the weather and so on, it was done in 4 weeks. And the great thing about it was that immediately the rats had gone, some Campbell Island snipe, which had been camping out on little tiny Jacquemart Island just south of the main island, recolonised immediately as soon as the rats had gone. They'd probably been trying for years and get trashed every time, but as soon as the rats had gone, they managed to establish. So it's worth waiting for something that really works. The point I want to make here is that there are common features of these failed attempts. Failures are usually due, in fact, you can look at all those examples I've reviewed and many others, they're usually due to a combination of human attitudes and technology. So among the human attitudes, which are most influential in the result, is, for example, to forget that nature is on the side of the pests. And any that manage to escape, whatever you throw at them, they're going to be the parents of those who will escape in the future. And then it's not a matter of counting the numbers removed, it's really important to know the numbers that remain. And therefore, you have to know the difference between adding to natural mortality and merely substituting for it. And a lot of failed programs simply just added to it. Then many of these failed programs didn't have enough coordination and agreement and flexibility and so on, and mostly, especially the older ones, not much stakeholder support. And of course, inadequate technology didn't help either. But the good thing about that is that even though the key factor, that fertility and immigration were the really important things, they were unaffected, we can now look back and say, look, that is part of the problem, and we can change all of those things. We can change human attitudes, we can change inadequate technology. So let's look at the common features of successful attempts. And when you look at the history of the ones that I've reviewed and others, the important things were confidence, very well designed pilots, meticulous preparation, particularly the Campbell Island one is very impressive over that, sufficient funding right to the end, monitoring not only the pest but the outcome, eliminating human self-interest, never not learning from experience, never giving up, making sure that you learn from experience, combine and switch strategies when you have to, make sure that you've got community support and landscape coordination, and, most important, new technology. And the new technology has to add to natural mortality, not just substitute for it. It has to address the question of how many are left and how many will be replaced and how quickly. And it has to have feedback, that is, outcome monitoring, to benefit the native species. And all of these things can be built on. Now we know what they are, and history will tell us we can build on all these. So here is my take-home message. All new programs must be based on evidence. And that's because there's an old saying, I'd like to be able to say who said it, I don't know who said it, but truth has limits. Among other things, there's another phrase, just for a minute, but in this context, the fact that truth has limits means that not everything that works will work everywhere. There is a limit to almost everything. The second half of the phrase is, truth has limits, but errors have none. There's almost no limit to how much time and money can be spent by not learning from experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. We do have time for questions, so fire away. James, you'll have to yell if there's no roving mic.
Kim, that was a great talk, but I was worried that with the example of stoats on nearshore islands, you might have been confounding incursion with eradication failure. So my experience overseas has been in the Seychelles, for example, they dwell on the fact that if, like I thought you might have been saying, that if the pest arrives at the island, the project has failed, when in fact we've had a 100% success rate intercepting these incursions on those islands. So in fact, I think we can eradicate the stoats from the nearshore islands. We can't stop them getting back, but we can stop them when they do get back.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. The thing is, I think it's useful to make a difference between damage control, which can be done over and over, even if it doesn't work every time, and eradication, which is a much further off aim. So if you want to get eradication, you're hoping that you'll never have the problem again. If you're doing damage control, then you're doing it in perpetuity, or at the risk of doing it. And it's useful to make a distinction between those two, because damage control can be done now with technology we have now, and the more the better. But predator-free New Zealand is something that's a bit further off the horizon. One of the worst things about being a later speaker in a conference like this is you don't know what everybody else is going to say. And I've been absolutely blown away with all these wonderful ideas and the questions that were asked that I was asking 40 years ago, and people are actually getting answers to them now. It's really inspiring, but it rather undercuts some of the things that I've been saying.
Well, we might leave it there, I think, just in the interest of keeping in time with the
Yeah.
other sessions. So
Okay.
I might